Hello and welcome to TVB News. Chief Executive John Lee said today he is confident cross-border travel with the mainland without daily quotas and nucleic acid test requirements will soon resume. He added that the government is also considering removing the remaining travel restrictions imposed on travelers from overseas. As Christy Khan reports, the government is actively promoting Hong Kong to the world in order to expedite the city's return to normalcy. Christy Khan reports.
Speaking to reporters today ahead of the weekly Executive Council meeting, Chief Executive John Lee said more than 700,000 people have headed north, while more than 600,000 visited Hong Kong since the first phase of quarantine-free travel between the city and the mainland began in early January. He added that more border checkpoints are set to reopen. Also, Lee said he's confident that the PCR testing requirement as well as the quota system will be scrapped very soon. Meanwhile, the CE said the government will drop the traffic restrictions imposed on inbound travelers from overseas.
We will also consider removing all travel restrictions for arrivals from overseas, such as the vaccination requirement or the rapid antigen test before arrival.
Asked if the mask mandate in the city will be lifted anytime soon, Lee didn't give a clear timeline, noting that Hong Kong is still facing high risk during this period of time.
We have to be able to ensure that we will be able to pass this winter surge, and when we successfully overcome this challenge, then there will be big room for consideration to see how and when we will remove the mask. Now, I think in the whole preparation for full resumption to normalcy, then the mask is obviously a thing that I will consider seriously of lifting.
Government pandemic advisor Yuen Kwok-yung earlier had called on the government to set up a committee to review its anti-COVID work over the past 3 years. Lee disagreed with the proposal, explaining that the government has been constantly reviewing its measures and policies to make sure that the administration is able to respond to new threats and new changes. He added that some of the community isolation facilities will be kept for emergency use, even though the city is gradually returning to normalcy. And Deputy Financial Secretary Michael Wong will be responsible for coordinating the task and deciding how to make good use of the remaining isolation facilities in the city. Christy Khan, TVB News.
The city reported 361 COVID-positive cases via PCR tests. 15 more COVID patients died. After the isolation order for COVID patients was scrapped on Monday, reports continue to emerge of how some private doctors refuse to treat COVID patients. With patients turning to public hospitals for treatment, the hospital authorities said general outpatient clinics have enough capacity to handle the demand. Jackie Lin reports.
Starting Monday, Hong Kong no longer issues isolation orders for COVID patients. That means employees who have tested COVID positive must secure a sick note from doctors to take sick leave. Under the new practice, we have heard more stories of frustration from COVID patients being turned away by private clinics. This COVID patient who tested positive via a rapid antigen test last Saturday told us how she was met with closed doors at 4 or 5 clinics in Yuen Long yesterday. She said one clinic put up a notice saying it doesn't treat patients with coughs, fever, or cold symptoms. She eventually found one clinic willing to treat COVID patients, but it doesn't accept her medical cards for insurance coverage. With more stories similar to this, the hospital authorities said private doctors have different ways of conducting their work. Speaking on the radio program, the hospital authorities' chief manager Tony Ha King Hang refused to comment on whether it would heap extra burdens on the public medical system, but said the daily consultation quotas of more than 2,000 reserved for COVID patients at general outpatient clinics should be enough. On Monday, some 1,400 COVID patients were treated there. He had the authorities beefed up quotas in Kowloon such as Sham Shui Po and Yau Chi Mang right away after spotting higher demand at these districts. Tony Ha also reminds that prior booking is needed at the hospital authorities' general outpatient clinics. Appointments could be made via the HA Go app or through one of the 7 care booking hotlines. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Cathay Pacific Airways Chief Executive Officer Ronald Lam said today the airline aims to ramp up flights between the city and the mainland by the end of next month. The target is to almost double the number of flights to 200 a week. Lam also stressed he's committed to work with and listen to employees amid a growing row over pay and work shifts. Sharon Tang has more.
It's been 4 months since the city gradually relaxed restrictions for travelers from the rest of the world. Cathay Pacific Airways' flight capacity in January is only at 40% of its pre-pandemic levels. But Cathay's new CEO, Ronald Lam, is not worried about the numbers.
I'm confident that we will be able to reach our capacity target on the passenger side by reaching 70% by end of this year and then 100% by next year.
Before the pandemic, over 1/3 of Cathay's passengers were transit passengers from the mainland. To reboot Hong Kong's status as an aviation transit hub, Lam aims to ramp up the number of flights between Hong Kong and 14 mainland cities from the current 120 per week to 200 by the end of February. Now that the target is set, is there enough manpower to support the airline in achieving its goals? Just last year, 500 pilots reportedly quit, meaning 1 in 5 Cathay pilots are no longer with the company. And the airline's cabin crew union has started work to rule industrial action in support of their demand for better pay and working hours.
I haven't observed any hiccups or disruptions during the peak seasons. And we continue to listen to our people, including our frontline staff and back office employees. In fact, in my new role as the CEO, I've been doing a lot of direct engagement with our teams. In the past few months, we have rolled out quite a range of improvement based on that feedback already. And we commit to continue to do that. In our rebuild of Cathay, our employees is really important asset.
Meanwhile, the airline has repeatedly cut down on flights between Hong Kong and Japan upon the latter's requests. The carrier believes this is only a temporary arrangement and hopes the restrictions can be lifted in March. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
The coronavirus is still a global health emergency, according to the World Health Organization, after a panel surmised the pandemic may be at an inflection point, leading to less deaths due to higher immunity. This as the Biden administration in the U.S. will end COVID emergency declarations on May 11th, nearly 3 years after they were imposed. The measures were first put in place in 2020 by then-President Donald Trump. Biden has repeatedly extended the measures, which are set to expire in the coming months. The White House Office of Management and Budget said the move to end the emergency declarations aligns with previous commitments to give at least 60 days' notice to terminate the public health emergency. The federal response to the virus will now become endemic, meaning it will be handled via agencies' normal authorities. In Pakistan, the death toll from a suicide bombing that tore through a mosque Monday has risen to 87. The attack occurred in the northwestern city of Peshawar, in one of the most fortified areas that houses offices of the police and counterterrorism departments. A commander for the Pakistan Taliban claimed responsibility on Twitter soon after the blast. But hours later, a spokesperson for the group said it was not their policy to target mosques, seminaries, and religious places. Tracy Furness has more.
More than 300 worshippers were praying, with more approaching, when the suicide bomber set off his explosives in the Sunni mosque in Peshawar. The attacker appeared to have passed through several barricades manned by security forces in order to get to the red zone compound that houses police and counter-terrorism officers. The blast ripped through the mosque, killing and injuring scores as it blew off part of the roof. What was left of the roof then caved in, injuring many more. Witnesses described chaotic scenes as the police and rescuers scrambled to rush the wounded to hospitals. Rescuers removed mounds of debris to reach those trapped under the rubble. This eyewitness said, "I did not see any dead bodies. We took out the injured and sent them to hospital. The dead bodies were inside the mosque buried under the rubble." Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif visited a hospital in Peshawar after the bombing and vowed stern action against those behind the attack. The Prime Minister tweeted, "The sheer scale of the human tragedy is unimaginable. This is no less than an attack on Pakistan." This as a mass funeral was held with full police honours for victims of the bombing. And as many as 27 coffins were placed on the ground while mourners offered funeral prayers at police lines in Peshawar. Peshawar straddles the tribal districts bordering Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. It is frequently targeted by Islamic militant groups, including Islamic State and the Pakistan Taliban. The Taliban-run Afghan Foreign Ministry, however, condemned the attack, saying it was contrary to the teachings of Islam. Condemnations have also come from the Saudi Embassy in Islamabad and the US Embassy, adding, "The United States stands with Pakistan in condemning all forms of terrorism." Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Belgian police have arrested a man who knifed 3 people in a Brussels metro station, leaving 1 in critical condition. The attack happened at around 5:45 in the evening in a metro car as it arrived at Schumann Station. Police immediately ruled out a terrorist attack. A 30-year-old suspect was arrested. Video inside the station shows police pointing weapons at a man who is later seen on the floor. The Schumann Station is directly under the main office of the European Union's Executive Commission. A source close to the investigation told Reuters the attacker was known to the police. Welcome back. French President Emmanuel Macron said his government would consider Ukraine's request for fighter jets for its war with Russia, though he said a number of conditions must be met. The Netherlands and Poland also refused to rule out supplying Kyiv with F-16 fighters. This before U.S. President Joe Biden offered a firm no when asked if the Pentagon would send warplanes to Ukraine. Nazvi Karim reports.
It started with a long, drawn-out request for tanks, ultimately successful. Now, Ukraine wants F-16 fighter jets for its war with Russia. And like the plea for tanks, opinion is divided among NATO members.
Will the United States provide F-16s to Ukraine?
No. The United States were at one time similarly reluctant to send heavy tanks to Ukraine. But last week, the Pentagon confirmed the U.S. would send M1 Abrams main battle tanks to the front lines, while Germany finally agreed to free up Leopard 2 tanks, with Britain supplying 14 Challenger 2s. European countries appear to be more open to providing Ukraine with the jets, though they have yet to make any firm commitments. French President Emmanuel Macron said at The Hague that Paris had yet to receive a formal request from Ukraine for the weapons, but would consider it, one of the conditions being that the jets would not touch Russian soil for fear of escalation. At the same press conference, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte was more cautious, echoing an earlier mark by his foreign minister in that there were no taboos in sending warplanes, but adding it would be a very big next step. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki also did not rule out the possibility of supplying Kiev with planes. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday met Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen in the war-ravaged city of Mykolaiv near the Black Sea, thanking Denmark for its military support. But he said the critical issue was speed. This is not about Denmark. It applies to all partners, all our friends and strategic partners who want to support Ukraine, he said. Meanwhile, Zoran Milanovic, president of NATO member Croatia, criticized Western nations for supplying Ukraine with heavy tanks, saying they're not super weapons that can finish off Russia. All the time I am looking for a rational plan, he said. A rational plan for me is not as long as it takes. Who pays the price? Europe is paying a price. America pays the least. Russia is insisting that no amount of Western weapons would alter the course of the war. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
In the U.S., 2 more Memphis police officers have been disciplined and 3 emergency responders fired in connection with the death of Tyre Nichols. Nichols was beaten by police and left handcuffed on the ground without medical attention. for nearly 15 minutes. We get more details from NBC News, but a warning that some of the images are disturbing.
Tonight, the Memphis Fire Department terminating 2 medical workers, Robert Long and Jamichael Sandridge, and 1 lieutenant, Michelle Whittaker, who all responded to the police beating of Tyree Nichols. The department says an internal investigation found they violated numerous MFD policies and protocols. 2 Memphis police officers are on administrative leave as investigations into the brutal beating death of Tyree Nichols continues. One of the officers, Preston Hemphill, a 5-year veteran of the force, was relieved of duty alongside the 5 now fired officers shortly after the January 7th traffic stop, according to the department. They say information about the disciplinary action was not immediately released because the investigation is still ongoing.
You guys are really doing a lot right now.
Bro, lay down.
I'm just trying to go home.
Hemphill can be seen on his body cam helping pin Nichols down during the initial confrontation and tasing Nichols as he fled on foot.
I hope they stop his ass.
Nichols died 3 days later. An attorney for Hemphill says his client was never present at the second scene and is cooperating with the investigation.
We think that he should be terminated like the other 5 black officers that were terminated.
Attorneys for the family of Tyree Nichols calling the revelation disappointing, saying in a statement, it certainly begs the question why the white officer involved in this brutal attack was shielded and protected from the public eye, and to date from sufficient discipline and accountability. On Saturday, the Memphis Police Department announced it would permanently deactivate its Scorpion unit that the 5 ex-officers now charged with murder belong to.
Units of that kind sometimes can, both in Memphis and around the country, can sometimes breed a culture of over-aggressiveness.
Officials declined to say whether Hemphill was a member of the unit, created little over a year ago to address violent crime. All of this has led to renewed calls for police reform, putting pressure on lawmakers to revisit now stalled negotiations that began after the murder of George Floyd. In the Senate, Republican Tim Scott and Democrat Cory Booker, who helped lead those negotiations, now expressing a willingness to return to the table. But any legislation would face an uphill battle in the Republican-controlled House, where some leaders are already expressing doubt.
I don't know that any law, any training, any reform is going to change. You know, this man was handcuffed. They continued to beat him.
Tonight, lawmakers still divided on the path forward as Tyree's parents move ahead with funeral plans.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Israel and the Palestinians to ease tensions following a spike in violence that has put the region on edge. Blinken arrived in Israel on Monday from Egypt, with tensions high after violence on both sides resulted in deaths. The Biden administration attempts to find common ground with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new right-wing government. Blinken did not offer any ideas for calming the situation. He was today scheduled to meet Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas.
There's an environment.
The Executive Council has approved Star Ferrys Fair hike proposal. The new fares for the 2 ferry routes from Wan Chai or Central to Chim Sa Choy are expected to take effect from April 3rd. Last year, Star Ferry submitted its fare adjustment proposal to the government, seeking to double the fares. The Executive Council approved the fare hike, but the increase is lower than what the company wanted. The fare for upper deck adult passengers during weekdays will go up from $3.20 to $5. The fare during the weekends and public holidays will increase from $4.20 to $6.50. Under the new pricing scheme, passengers aged 65 or above will have to pay $2 instead of having free rides. This year's Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination will begin on April 21st. A total of 50,823 candidates have applied for the exam. That's around 700 individuals more than last year, and the first increase in the number of candidates since 2014. 43,117 school candidates accounted for this year's HKDSC examinees, while some 7,000 people belong to the category of private candidates. Around 90% of school candidates have applied for examinations in 4 core subjects with an additional 2 or 3 electives. And a 44-year-old fabric market in Sham Shui Po officially marked its end at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Known among locals as Pangjai, around 20 regular shoppers could still be seen purchasing fabrics in the final hours of the Yen Chao Street Hawker Bazaar. Several shopkeepers kept their stalls open for business right up to the very end. With the closing of Pangjai, the land will be returned to the government for public housing development. Among the 49 current operators, only 16 will be relocated to the nearby Tung Chau Street temporary market, with the official opening set for tomorrow. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.